the usual committee report. Our last meeting was March 13th. Topics included admin rules consultation and CSO decommissioning, which is up later. The meeting prior to that, Dr. Jesse Ivan presented on the Arthropod Biodiversity Project. Just a couple quick points. One is nothing really surprising, but non-native species are found on on a wide variety of plants, where most of the native species are very plant or host specific, which is a common trait with invasive species and native species, especially here in Hawaii. Other recommendation, sort of long-term from this project, is those native species that are specific to an individual plant type or flightless are good indicators of healthy ecosystems, as they're some of the first things to disappear or be reduced in population if there is a stress. The next meeting of the Environment Committee is to be determined, but as Kalepa said, CSO decommissioning will continue to be an agenda item for the foreseeable future. Moving on, the Mauna Kea speaker series continues on a monthly basis. This Thursday of this week, the 4th, Dr. Evan Rem, who's a postdoc from University of California, Santa Barbara, working with the Forest Service Institute for Pacific Island Forestry just up the hill, will be talking on koa regeneration in Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge. That's Thursday of this week at 7 o'clock in STB 108, our usual location. May is to be determined. June will be on the Akamai internship program that's held every summer at a date that we need to work out with the Akamai program management. And after that will be Doug and Mary Beth from CFHT and their Mauna Kea Scholars program, once we get the details sorted. I'll spend probably the longest time on the seabird and bat inventory project. It was in the news recently. Thank you, Dave. And actually, I'll credit you again in a minute. But basically, just to recap, work originally started in the Forest Reserve below the Science Reserve to better guide our searches on UH management lands. We've proven that we can find stuff in the Forest Reserve. That was what Dave put in the paper, had on the news, was that we have found things both using radar and acoustic methods in the Forest Reserve. Actually, as a result of the news article that Big Island Video News put out, a hiker in the Forest Reserve, still above where they had documented it in the news article, found a dead ua'u on the ground, reported it, and so that's been helping guide the project as well, because a dead individual on the ground is indicative of either a colony or at least an isolated attempted breeding event, which is unfortunate that the bird was dead, but good in terms of helping guide their research. So basically, there are two main methods that this study is employing and it's both birds and bats: radar and acoustics. The radar, especially 2018, they did a lot of radar work. This is led by Dr. Pat Hart, who's the chair of the biology department here on campus. They did a lot of radar work around the R1, the high elevation road. Basically finding seabirds and bats all the way up to 11,000 feet, including at Halaipohaku. Foraging, nothing to date has been documented in the Science Reserve or higher than 11,000 feet, but it's a sort of a slow process to put the recorders out. Time consuming to evaluate it. It's seasonal, so you can't do it all year round. So. The other aspect of radar is just last week, Rob Deal, who's a U.S. Geological Survey biologist from Montana, was out working with Pat and their crew. Rob is a specialist in using radar for ornithological monitoring, particularly like around wind turbines and that kind of thing around the country. Basically, he's helping, and he's really interested in working with Pat on this project because it's a very simple, high elevation ecosystem, few species, we know what they are, and they're automating the process. So it had been taking notes, watching the radar screen. Now it records it. The computer program identifies the species, or that's what they're trying to figure out, is can they automate the identification of species? If they can do it in a simple ecosystem like we have at high elevation, then hopefully they can apply it elsewhere on the mainland. This is a first in Hawaii, and it's fairly novel in the country as well. So Pat's really excited about that, which is great because it'll really help us figure out what some of the things that we're seeing are, because there's still a few questions in the radar. And we're getting, we're making sure that by having somebody like Rob involved, we're making sure that we're getting the best possible analysis. Acoustic recordings, Pu'ukanakaleanui in the Mauna Kea Forest Reserve is the sort of the site that both Ua'u and Ake'ake, the band rub storm petrel, have been confirmed. And there's been bats detected at Halepohaku. As I mentioned, there was the recent sighting or find of a Ua'u on Red Hill, still in the Forest Reserve. And at this point, Pat's continuing to do the radar work, especially in the Forest Reserve, seeing if we could identify the flight patterns. If they're going uphill, then we know where to look uphill. There are acoustic monitors in the Science Reserve that get retrieved every couple of months or every couple of weeks, but it's kind of a needle in a haystack to actually try and find something on the ground, because that's only going to find it when they're on the ground. And they're keen on looking for colonies, because that's sort of the ultimate goal. Otherwise, annual monitoring for Arthropod, seems like it's early, but starting to get ready for June and July fieldwork. Been talking to the NAR program about cooperating on that. The regular invasive species monitoring, we did relocate a honeybee hive from Halepohaku down to lower elevation. They're non-native and impact the native species adversely. It was a prolific year for rodents at high elevation, but that's episodic. The first documentation we found of that is from 1926, so it's not exactly a new phenomena. It just happens periodically. And facility trapping has identified no new threats recently. And sorry, Don, that was a correction. I said, yeah, the no is important, a significant omission in my written. Otherwise, just update on some random stuff. Jordan Zarders completed his master's thesis on invasive species threats and the vehicle wash station feasibility. Marie McKenzie's master's thesis was accepted for publication in the International Journal of Climatology, looking at temperature trends in Hawaii in a century of change. The Climate Network proposal is in review with Tom Giambaluca and Marie. There's an SO2 sulfur dioxide sensor at Halepohaku now, I think in part due to some of the efforts by CFHT. That's available at a website that we'll put in the minutes. I could, if somebody wants it, I can tell you afterwards. It's a long URL that is going to be kind of meaningless. You may have also seen there was a press release. The species descriptions for 2 day-flying Agrotis moths was published in the journal Zootaxa. The species had been known for a long time, but the species description takes a long time to generate a couple of years of research and the natural history work. So that was formally published, which is exciting, which means they have official names. The Erosion Project with Dr. Ryan Peroy, he was efficient with his use of funds, so he's expanding his scope to include Halepohaku and some representative segments of the road corridor. After some of the hurricanes last year, he's done more data acquisition and was going to do a little bit more at high elevation, because it really looks like, at least in the human-induced areas, the erosion is pretty substantial after storms. There's also natural erosion, which he is able to detect, things like creeping soil lobes, presumably related to freeze-thaw cycles. So he's trying to differentiate that. And he'll be Nathan Stevenson, who was the original master's student on the project, now works for a firm that he's helping bring out a vehicle mounted basically on a a LiDAR camera system, so they'll drive the road later this summer and collect an additional iteration of high-resolution LiDAR data for the road. Maybe not the gravel section because it's so rough, and having that bouncing around isn't going to be very high-quality data. And let's see, as Stephanie mentioned, the Ingress Egress project started. We planted a number of trees and shrubs in association with that permit. Unfortunately, that somewhat record cold snap came along shortly thereafter and wiped out most of them, or a large portion. That was a pretty unusual event from what we've heard from everybody. So I think that was just unfortunate timing on our part. Not much else that could be done about it. And there have been a lot of invasive species inspections associated with that as well. And Stephanie covered the community events with that. Take any questions.
Great. Thanks, Fritz. Any questions for Fritz? Yep, Julie.
So Fritz, did Dr. Hart determine the sex of the dead ua'u, and does he have any idea what caused the demise?
They're going hiking in the next few days. They don't have the bird.
Oh.
So it was just reported
reported
recently. So they still need to go find them.
Okay.
They're going hiking.
Also, just FYI, my staff is actually doing bat surveys in the lower Mauna Kea Forest Reserve areas this next couple of months, and they are consulting with Pat Hart as well.
Okay, great.
Last question. So with the dead species at the pullout, I know we talked about it, but I wasn't sure if that was going to be in another project. Are you going to continue planting?
Oh, for the Ingress Egress project?
Yes.
Yeah, the permit requires us to plant, I forget the exact amount, but close to 200 mamane trees. So, yeah, we will be continuing to plant, and once we get through the pavement phase, then we'll move on to getting a greenhouse built as well.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Erosion at Halepohaku and on the road, could you tell us more about that and let us know if there's going to be a report to the board in the future?
So I forget if it's a CMP action or a natural resource management plan priority. The question is about the erosion project at Halepohaku and the road, and if there'll be a report to the board at a future date. So in short, Dr. Peroy will have a final report that will be made available. Whether or not he presents at the board is sort of up to the board. He did present as part of the Mauna Kea speaker series, and I suspect we'll have him on this project, and I suspect we'll have him do it again as part of this project as that sort of wraps up. So yeah, he's basically looking at both natural and human accelerated, how any development may accelerate erosion and what can be done to mitigate that. So yeah, there'll be a report, and we'll certainly work with him to make sure the results are made public. Offhand, no, I don't want to put him on the spot or myself, but yeah, probably another year or two. Just yeah.
So Fritz, I'd like to request that when that report is done, we bring Dr. Peroy and
certainly
do a report to us.
Yeah, no
Great.
problem.
That'd be very useful to us. Thank you.